The island of Okinawa, in the spring of 1964, was a place where the past never fully loosened its grip on the present. Ancient stone walls, tiled roofs darkened by decades of sea wind, and narrow streets that twisted like dried riverbeds all seemed to carry the memory of old battles, old codes, and old silences. In the southern district of Naha, far from the tourist beaches and postcard cliffs, there stood a modest wooden dojo tucked behind a grove of twisted pine trees. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, the kind of place a passerby might mistake for a storage shed or a forgotten community hall. But inside that unassuming building, a legend had been quietly forged, one that traveled not through newspapers or television, but through bruised bodies, broken egos, and whispered warnings passed from one martial arts school to another across Japan and beyond. Her name was Reika Sato, and she was undefeated. Not merely unbeaten in the polite ceremonial sense of the word, but utterly, ruthlessly dominant in every challenge she accepted. Men twice her size had come to her dojo wearing black belts, championship medals, and the smug certainty of those who believed that strength, reach, and reputation were enough to conquer anything. They left with their confidence shattered, their techniques exposed, and in some cases, with injuries serious enough to end their training careers altogether. Reika did not merely win her matches, she humiliated her opponents. She would let them believe, in the first few seconds, that they had found an opening, that her small frame and calm demeanor were signs of weakness. Then, like a sudden typhoon tearing across the shoreline, she would dismantle them, precise strikes to nerve clusters, devastating low kicks that buckled knees, throws that slammed bodies onto the hard wooden floor with a sound like splitting timber. Those who had come to test her often found themselves staring at the ceiling beams, gasping for air, while she stood over them without a single hair out of place, her dark eyes unreadable, her breathing as steady as if she had been meditating the entire time. Her reputation spread until even the boldest challengers began to hesitate. Dojos across Okinawa stopped accepting open invitation matches against her. Traveling fighters from Tokyo, Osaka, and even Hong Kong canceled their trips after hearing the stories. Eventually, a saying took root among martial artists throughout the region. No man has ever beaten Reika Sato, and no man ever will. Reika herself said little about her perfect record. She trained from dawn until long after the sun had sunk behind the pines, running barefoot along the rocky shoreline, striking bundles of tightly bound straw until her knuckles bled, practicing kata until her muscles trembled from exhaustion. She lived alone above the dojo in a small apartment that smelled of incense, sweat, and old wood. She had no manager, no trophies on display, no photographs of famous admirers on her walls. The only decoration in her training hall was a single calligraphic scroll hanging above the bung. Kamidana altar, written in bold black ink, "Empty your cup." Reika did not speak often of what those words meant to her, but everyone who trained under her came to understand the lesson in bruises and humility. To stand in her dojo was to be reminded, again and again, that pride was heavier than any opponent you would ever face. Thousands of miles away, in Los Angeles, California, a man who had built his own legend through discipline, innovation, and an almost supernatural understanding of movement followed the rumors with quiet fascination. His name was Bruce Lee. At 33 years old, Bruce had already become a controversial figure in the martial arts world. To some, he was a visionary, a man who dared to question centuries of tradition and who spoke of martial arts not as a rigid system of styles and belts, but as a living, breathing philosophy of adaptability. To others, he was a threat, an arrogant upstart who had no respect for the old ways. Bruce paid little attention to either praise or criticism. He was far more interested in what worked. He had spent years studying Wing Chun under the legendary Ip Man in Hong Kong, but he had never allowed himself to become imprisoned by any single method. He constantly tested, refined, discarded, and rebuilt his understanding of combat, always searching for the simplest, fastest, most direct path from intention to action. When he first heard the stories about Reika Sato, he listened without comment. Friends and students warned him to stay away. "She's not like other fighters," one of his longtime training partners told him over coffee in a cramped Los Angeles apartment. "She doesn't just beat people. She breaks them. Mentally, physically, spiritually." Bruce nodded slowly, absorbing the warning the way he absorbed every piece of information, not as fear, but as data. Another acquaintance, a Japanese karate instructor who had visited Okinawa the previous year, leaned forward and said, "Bruce, no man has ever beaten her. They say she's unbeatable." Bruce set down his cup, looked out the window at the smoggy California sky, and after a long silence replied, "Then maybe it's time someone found out why." 2 weeks later, under a sky the color of hammered steel, Bruce Lee stepped off a small propeller plane onto the tarmac of Naha Airport. The air smelled of salt, wet earth, and burning charcoal. He traveled lightly, carrying only a small duffel bag, a worn notebook filled with observations and sketches of movement, and the quiet determination of a man who had crossed an ocean, not to feed his ego, but to test a question that would not leave him alone. He took a taxi through the winding streets of Naha as evening settled over the island. Paper lanterns glowed outside tiny restaurants. Old men sat on wooden porches smoking thin cigarettes and watching the world go by with unreadable expressions. Children chased each other through narrow alleys, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Bruce said little during the ride. He watched everything: the way people walked, the way they carried themselves, the rhythm of the island. When the taxi finally stopped in front of the grove of pines, Bruce stepped out and stood for a moment, staring at the unassuming wooden building half hidden among the trees. There were no bright signs, no tournament banners, no photographs of champions, only the faint sound of someone striking a heavy bag with methodical, relentless force. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact was like a heartbeat. Bruce slung his bag over his shoulder and walked toward the door. Inside the dojo, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, pine resin, and old varnish. The wooden floor was worn smooth by years of bare feet. Shafts of amber light slanted through paper-covered windows, illuminating drifting motes of dust. At the far end of the room, Reika Sato stood alone, dressed in a simple white keikogi tied with a black belt. Her black hair was pulled back severely from her face. She was barefoot, her feet planted firmly on the floor as if the building had grown up around her. In front of her hung a heavy canvas punching bag. She struck it again and again with the heel of her palm, with her elbow, with short, snapping kicks that made the entire bag shudder on its chains. She did not turn when Bruce entered. She did not greet him. She simply continued her training, as though his presence were no more significant than a breeze slipping through the doorway. Bruce waited patiently, his hands relaxed at his sides. After several long minutes, Reika finally stopped. The bag swung gently behind her. She turned slowly and looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark, calm, and utterly without curiosity. "You are lost," she said in Japanese, her voice flat and emotionless. Bruce bowed respectfully. "My name is Bruce Lee," he replied, also in Japanese, though his accent carried the faintest trace of Hong Kong. "I came because I heard you are undefeated." Reika's expression did not change. "Many men have come because of that." "I'm not here to take your title," Bruce said. "I'm here to understand." A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, or amusement passed through Reika's eyes. "Understanding," she repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "People do not come to my dojo to understand. They come to conquer, or to be conquered." Bruce met her gaze without flinching. "Then let this be different." For the first time, Reika looked at him carefully, taking in his size, his stance, the way he carried himself. He was smaller than most of the men who challenged her. He wore no championship patches, no imposing demeanor, no visible aura of menace. And yet there was something in his stillness that unsettled her in a way she could not immediately name. "You may warm up," she said, at last. Bruce bowed again and moved to the center of the dojo. He did not perform any flashy display of strength. He did not throw impressive kicks into the air or shout to prove his spirit. He simply began to move slowly at first. Then, with increasing fluidity, his body loosening, his weight shifting from foot to foot, his hands alive and restless, as though they were searching for something in empty space. Reika watched him in silence. For the first time in years, she felt a tiny seed of uncertainty take root in her mind. This man did not move like the others. He did not telegraph his intentions. He did not fight against the air. He seemed to dance with it. When Bruce finished his warm-up, he stopped and looked at her expectantly. Reika stepped onto the training floor, her bare feet making no sound. "Rules," she said. "No serious injury. We stop at first clean point, or if one of us falls. This is not a spectacle. This is a lesson." Bruce nodded, agreed. They bowed to each other. Then Reika attacked. She came forward with explosive speed, launching a low kick aimed at Bruce's supporting leg. It was the same opening strike that had ended dozens of matches before they had truly begun. Bruce did not retreat. He did not block in the traditional sense. At the last possible instant, his body simply shifted, his foot sliding half an inch, and Reika's kick sliced through empty air. Reika's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She recovered instantly and followed with a rapid combination palm strike to the chest, elbow to the temple, knee rising toward the ribs. Bruce flowed around each attack as though the strikes were moving in slow motion. He did not waste energy. He did not meet force with force. He redirected. He evaded. He vanished from the line of attack and reappeared in a place Reika had not expected him to be. The dojo filled with the soft whisper of movement, the creak of floorboards, the sharp exhalations of effort. Reika increased her speed, her ferocity, her precision. She threw everything she had, techniques honed over years of brutal training. Strikes aimed at vulnerable points, throws designed to shatter balance and pride in the same instant. And still, Bruce remained untouched. For the first time in her undefeated career, Reika felt as though she were fighting smoke. No matter how aggressively she attacked, she could not land cleanly. No matter how cleverly she feinted, Bruce seemed to see through her intentions before she fully formed them. Frustration began to creep into her movements. Her breathing grew slightly heavier. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. Bruce, by contrast, looked as calm as he had when he first walked through the door. Reika suddenly changed tactics. Instead of attacking wildly, she stepped back and lowered her stance, becoming perfectly still. She waited, forcing Bruce to make the first move. Bruce studied her for a heartbeat, then advanced not with a wild lunge, but with a single, deceptively simple step forward. His hand shot out in a straight line, a punch so direct and economical that it seemed almost insultingly plain. Reika moved to intercept it, but Bruce's punch was not aimed at her body. It was aimed at the space she was about to occupy. At the precise moment her guard shifted, Bruce's fingertips tapped her shoulder light as a falling leaf, yet placed with such perfect timing that Reika's entire balance wavered for the briefest fraction of a second. In that instant, Bruce pivoted, swept her supporting leg, and guided her gently but irresistibly toward the floor. Reika hit the wooden boards with a muffled thud. The sound echoed through the silent dojo like a thunderclap. For several stunned seconds, neither of them moved. Reika lay on her back, staring up at the wooden beams overhead, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. No man had ever put her on the floor. No man had ever beaten her. And yet here she was, defeated not by overwhelming strength, not by cruelty, not by superior size or aggression, but by understanding, by adaptability, by a kind of martial art that refused to be caged inside any single style, any single tradition, any single rigid idea of what fighting was supposed to be. Bruce stood over her, breathing quietly, his hand extended. Reika looked up at him, and for the first time in years, the hard mask of invincibility cracked. In her eyes there was no hatred, no humiliation, no desperate need to save face. There was only a deep, aching humility. Slowly, she reached up and took Bruce's hand. He pulled her gently to her feet. Reika bowed low, lower than she had ever bowed to anyone in her life. When she straightened, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I understand now," she said. "Empty your cup." Bruce returned the bow, his expression solemn. "And keep filling it," he replied. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees, carrying the scent of salt and rain. Inside the little wooden dojo in Naha, the undefeated warrior who had humiliated every opponent finally learned the hardest lesson of all, that true mastery begins the moment you admit there is still more to learn.